I am sitting in for Martha Senator today because she has burst water pipe problems, which is never any fun. And I have Katherine Rye Jewell in the studio, and she has written a book, Live from the Underground. So Kate uncovers how battles to control college radio were about more than music. They were an influential, if unexpected, front in the nation's culture wars. And so I was there for that. I was there for that time. So I have a lot of thoughts about it since I was there. I wasn't on the radio back then, certainly not in the 60s, but I am very aware of the influence that radio had during that time period. How, Kate, what was your decision to write this book?
So I did college radio as a student, as an undergraduate when I was at Vanderbilt University in the late 1990s. And it really formed such an important part of my college experience. But it was as a student activity. It was not something that I ever considered going into professionally. And so I was really kind of an observer in the world of radio and music and trying to learn about these underground music scenes that I was encountering. But for the most part, for me, it was just fun. It was just an interesting exploration until in 2011, the university decided to sell our radio station. And there was a big movement to try and save it. And I began asking questions like a historian does of, well, where did these stations come from? Why were we so invested in this particular way of doing radio? And what did it mean once the station went away? And what are the challenges that are presented to radio in our current moment?
You know, I did exactly the same thing because I'm managing a station here in Asheville, North Carolina. And after I got my sea legs for running the station, I began wondering how did this happen? How did this whole thing happen? So college radio, when do you think it really got started?
So college radio has been around since radio itself, that students and electrical engineering departments started experimenting with radio. A lot of institutions, particularly Midwestern land-grant institutions, started investing in radio very early because they could provide really beneficial services and information to farmers, that they could send it out over the plains and they could pick it up in their farmhouses and get the information that they needed to participate in the market and to implement changes that were required in agricultural production. And
weather reports.
And weather, very important, very
Yes.
important. And once we begin to see that commercialized system of broadcasting come about in the 1930s, educational radio kind of gets pushed to the side in favor of the private run commercial system that we get in broadcasting in the United States. And it's only thanks to the efforts of some reformers who continue to push for educational radio that we get when FM comes along in the 1940s, we get that set aside of 88.1 to 91.9. But it's only until in the 1960s that we start to see college radio emerge on FM in large numbers. And at that moment, these stations are really different. They're very local in their orientation and in the programming. It's usually for the campus only or for certain constituents around the campus. And they start to become conversant with things that are going on in popular culture, like freeform FM down on the commercial dial. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the early freeform stations start to pull in talent from the college stations, and they're very much in conversation with one another. And where I pick up the story in my book is in the 1970s, where those students have created this idea of alternative radio on college radio. But really, that just meant anything not mainstream, anything that you couldn't get on a commercial signal.
Yeah, anything non-corporate, basically.
Yeah, and they become to equate that with what it means to do educational radio, and it provides a lot of protection for them to do that, even as the commercial music industry is looking at what's going on at these stations and saying, "Ooh, this is really valuable. We can incorporate that into our business model."
Mhm. So, my theory is college radio was part of what I call a perfect storm that reflects American culture and the music that happened in the 60s and 70s. The fact that we had these freeform radio stations and college radio stations would not have happened without the magic of a radio signal. And my theory is that the music of that time will endure through the centuries because it came out of such a creative dynamic. There's so much conflict going on at the time, and when you have high conflict, that's fertile ground for creativity to emerge, and it did. And
Absolutely.
so we, if I was watching a Japanese movie a couple of nights ago from maybe the early '90s, and in their karaoke scenes, they were all playing American music. And so, I mean, it just permeates. It just basically dominates the musical part of American culture dominates across the globe, basically.
Yeah, and I think why college radio is so important to that story is because it's a place where the people doing radio are much closer to music fans than they were to musicians or to record label executives or
Mm,
commercial actors. And so these stations become really important sites of conflict over what the most valuable sounds are and who gets represented. So while they're reflecting what's going on in US culture and popular culture and popular music, they're also places where people are having these really very emotional debates over what is American culture? What does a pluralistic society sound like? And I think that's one of the reasons why we have so much affection for that music because it symbolizes and it resonates with us because it pulls in those deeper kinds of cultural connections that we have with one another and the way that we create meaning through the experience of listening to music together and connecting over a sound, but also what that sound represents more broadly about our belonging as a nation and
mm,
welcoming many types of voices into
mm.
the sonic sphere.
Yeah, and along with the host, the personalities are part of that connection, and that goes to radio's intimate connection with whoever is listening to it because it's coming right into your ear. Chances are you're either in your car or, in my case, I listen to our station through my smart TV in my bedroom, so it's in my most private chamber basically, and that creates a so the power of the medium to create an intimate connection with people is very unique
Yeah,
and
and
significant.
there's an immediacy to it. It's that
Mhm,
liveness that it's not
mhm,
the same as putting on a record. You don't feel the same connection
right.
in a sort of an imaginary realm that you do when you're listening to recorded music, that when it's coming through your radio, you're having the same experience as many other people that you can, even though you don't know them necessarily, you have a sense of commonality with other people who are in different types of spaces, have different backgrounds, have different experiences than you do, but yet you share this experience in common. So it allows for a kind of imagined community in a unique way than other
Mhm.
forms of listening do.
And so you mentioned that you were at Vanderbilt in your college years, and then in 2011, Vandy sold the station to NPR, and the the absolute deep disappointment and consternation over the decision to do that reflects just how deeply people who get involved in this medium react to something happening where they're taking away something that is deeply important to them. And I heard another interview where you mentioned that you were contemplating uh, a follow up book on the hostile takeovers of these college stations. You want to touch on your experience at Vanderbilt over this, and your feeling about what went down, because I've heard this story a lot, so I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, when I was doing radio in the late 90s, that was that post 1996 Telecommunications Act moment where there was the corporatization of commercial FM rock radio in particular was accelerating, as well as just radio and broadcasting in general, and the decline of localism in broadcasting. And so we looked at, it was then, WKDF, which was the alternative rock giant in Nashville, as our big enemy. And I never would have expected that NPR would be the station that I would see as a rival to ours and to our way of doing radio, that they exist kind of, in concert with one another. They both emerge from a similar origin story out of the origins of educational radio. But NPR is very much a national vision, whereas educational radio run by students relies very much on localism. And I think one of the reasons why we felt so betrayed by Vanderbilt selling the station was because it seemed like it was coming from decision makers who were only operating with a view of a Vanderbilt identity that was seen on the national stage, that was in line with these national trends and how you define what a prestigious university looks like, and that they weren't looking at the way that Vanderbilt sits within a specific community within the city of Nashville, Music City, Tennessee, and Music City, USA, really, and that this station was a really important local community institution that provided really valuable connections between Vanderbilt, which, doesn't always have the best image in the city of Nashville, to put it mildly in some ways. And so they were giving up a really inexpensive way of creating those connections in a meaningful way that seemed nonsensical to us. And they were doing it by selling it out to sort of a corporatized version of what it was we were doing. Now, the story's not all a total sad ending, because out of the wreckage of WRVU, student-run radio still exists at Vanderbilt. They still have a streaming station, although the focus is less on the community. And we get a low-power FM signal out of it in WXNA, which was resurrected by a lot of the community participants at WRVU and continues to be that really strong voice of the community and of all the many, many sounds of Nashville. Because of course, Nashville is not just country music, even though we love it. It is, and it's many different forms of country, bluegrass, what have you.
In the way radio is done now, because I read the ending of your book and how you mentioned how these low power stations. You mentioned Vanderbilt has a low power, probably 100 watt, probably 100, but they range between 10 and 100 watts. How that's kind of like the new or iteration of what the role college radio was playing, and hopefully, in this paradigm shift between everyone having a bullhorn now, thanks to the internet and podcasting and that sort of thing, the passion that people have, starting with people of my era and into your era, will be part of this, what I consider new paradigm of radio, that is not just an analog signal, but is a digital signal too, because this station has been streaming since maybe 2010, and now that everyone has a bullhorn, there is so much noise out there. I feel that the hunger and the desire is for more authenticity in on the airwaves and out there in the ether, where everybody's being bombarded from every direction with propaganda and noise.
Yeah, and I think that there's a real desire that drove college radio to connect with certain types of music that you couldn't hear elsewhere. Now we can tune in and hear anything we want and connect with music fans of a certain genre across space. But the thing is that is not providing us with those local community connections. It's participatory, but I think people are still really hungering for that sense of connection and participation in their local geographic space. And college radio always had many different forms. It was many different types of radio rolled up into one. It could be very professional. It could be very informative. It could be very staid. It could be very square. It could be very community oriented. It could be very campus oriented. And so I think what we're seeing is separating out of that role of community radio, and some campuses still really embracing that role, and others maybe ceding that responsibility to other types of institutions and business models for doing that type of radio that gives people that sense of participation.
Personally, I'm hoping that radio will emerge as something that is locally significant to people. Um, I'm going back to, you mentioned some of the controversies, a lot of the controversies that went on in college radio at the time. And it seems to me that college radio in general is a magnet, or independent media in general is a magnet for drama.
Mhm.
Lou Hill, who started NPR type stations, was driven to suicide over his board whenever he wanted a certain kind of broadcasting that he was doing to go out to the world, and his board was totally against it. The creator of FM Signal, Edwin Armstrong, ended up committing suicide over the drama of having FM radio and all the other magical inventions that he did, and the other people trying to sue him to stop him from doing what he was doing. So this bane of controversy seems to be ubiquitous in the medium.
Yeah, it's really interesting to consider how high passions run over these signals and these technologies, because, it's this electromagnetic spectrum, yet there is something about the experience of doing radio and the kinds of connections that it forges that repeatedly when I talk to people now, I'm starting to get a lot of emails from people who've read the book or heard that I wrote about college radio and just have to express how much love they have for these stations. They want to tell everybody and tell me like how important they are, and that it's not just a sense of nostalgia, which can be part of it, of maybe for a certain time in our lives when we're coming of age and figuring out who we are. It's this really important experience. That's part of it. But I think it's much more also about the kinds of connections that we forge through this medium, and the kind of mystery that there is of sitting in the little room. And they're usually little rooms. They often don't have any windows, and talking into a microphone, and the wonderful mystery of not really knowing who you're talking to, but yet having that sense of connection. And I think that's one of the differences that we have in the world of streaming, where I talked to a student who went through the transformation of Vanderbilt from a FM station to an online only station. And she said, I went from being able to talk, potentially to all of Nashville, whole metropolitan areas, was a big, pretty high wattage station for a college signal, to all of a sudden I could see how many people were on the stream, and it was 4 people, and one was my roommate and one was my mom. And and it just changes how you experience. It's still radio. It's still doing a form of broadcasting and connecting, but it is a very different way of doing radio.
Well, it's interesting that you have heard from people who have this deep passion for the medium. And I hear that too, not necessarily because I wrote a book about it, but I'm in contact with a lot of people who are involved in radio, and but also with our volunteers who come and do radio for us, because we're a volunteer station. We're all volunteer. And to have people come in on a weekly basis, year after year, and continue putting something on the air, making it lively, making it fun, making it informative, has the motivation to do that is comes from very special, very rare people that are not that not your not on every street corner for sure. So uh, so this attraction, this love and appreciation of the medium is runs very deep in our uh, collective psyche.
Yeah, I think so. And, I think that's one of the reasons why we need to be open for what radio's next chapter is going to be and the
Mhm.
different ways that we could continue it and to provide that ability for students to still volunteer their time or pay them. We could pay them. That would be a decision we could make, so that they don't have to, go work at a coffee shop 30 hours a week to get through college, that they can go to the radio station, and that we preserve it as a place not just to get certain skills to get a job, but as a place to make those bigger connections, to do that cultural exploration and connection that is really what these institutions are all about. They're about knowledge and cultural creation, and we have to be willing to make the investment in them as a society for those things to continue to be created.
Yeah, and I heard you mention in one of your interviews that it is difficult for students to also invest all that time in doing a show for a college station, and we have the same thing happening here in the community of Asheville, because in our case, people are having to pay their mortgage. They're having to put the kids through college. So as it turns out for us that a lot of our hosts, which are all volunteer, are people of who grew up in this, who experienced the 60s and 70s and 80s radio halcyon days, and remember that and want to be expressing that for people who hear radio now to experience it.
Hmm. Yeah, and this is one of the things that's happening to radio in general, is that the audience is growing older, even though it's still very much, a high percentage of Americans tune in to terrestrial radio
Right, right.
on a weekly basis. It is skewing older. And I think that's why we have to preserve that space for younger people to
Mhm.
get involved in it and to figure out what that next function is going to be. Very creative, right?
Yeah,
They will
yeah,
figure
yeah,
something
yeah,
out.
yeah. We've had an intern program where we bring in some students from UNCA, uh, and but again, it's the time factor for them, and they can't stick around um, after they fulfill their internship time frame, and it's because there's so much pressure on them these days.
Mhm.
So I get
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm running a banner across the bottom of the
Mhm.
video here about Kate's book, Live from the Underground, and the author is Katherine Rye Jewell, and it's uh, from University of North Carolina Press, which is our proud state of North Carolina. So we're happy that UNC Press was the publisher of your book, and I'm gonna ask you to give us a website or something where people can get in touch with you if they want more information, or if they want to do an interview with you
Sure.
or read
So
your book.
yeah, read the book. So I'm available at katherinejewell.com. I have a website with all of my contact details and information about the book, as well as some various links to all the things. I have also a series of playlists And I recognize the irony of putting college radio playlists on Spotify, and maybe there's a deep sense of betrayal that some may feel as a result. But I do have very, very long 25 plus hour playlists that are drawn from the archives and the research that I've done.
So, Katherine, thank you so much for participating and doing an interview with WPPM, and thank you for writing a book about this incredible magical medium of college radio.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you very much.